The time is 2:46 p.m. Friday, March 11th, 2011. In Kamaishi, a junior high school student glances up from her textbook. The classroom floor gives a sudden, violent lurch. Simultaneously, a chorus of mobile phones shriek in unison the piercing, electronic wail of Japan's earthquake early warning system. A moment of stunned silence, and then the world begins to sway. Not a quick jolt, but a deep, sickening, rolling motion that just doesn't stop. For 1 minute, 2 minutes, an eternity stretching into 6. Across the Tohoku region, the ordinary fabric of a Friday afternoon is being torn apart. Fluorescent lights flicker wildly. 10 snap off plunging offices into a terrifying twilight. Filing cabinets topple, drawers spilling their contents across heaving floors. Outside, the solid asphalt of roads begins to ripple like water. Concrete utility poles whip back and forth with a sound like cracking bullwhips. Along the coast, massive seawalls, built to withstand the ocean's fury, groan under a strain they were never designed for. In a classroom in Kamaishi, the student dives under a desk, the drills of a lifetime taking over her body before her mind can catch up. She remembers the lesson tsunami tendenko, save your own life. First, at Sendai Airport, a ground crew chief watches in disbelief as multi-ton passenger jets on the tarmac bounce on their landing gear like toys. The control tower sways precariously against the sky. He feels the ground beneath the runway turn to jelly, a phenomenon known as water is forced up from the saturated, reclaimed land. In the coastal town of Minamisanriku, a volunteer firefighter sprints from his post. He has one mission: get to the manual siren and warn the town. Every second counts. He runs as the very ground beneath his feet tries to throw him off balance. Further south, in the port of Ofunato, a veteran fisherman, seeing the ocean's strange behavior, makes a split-second, counterintuitive decision. Instead of running for high ground, he scrambles to untie his boat from its mooring. He knows the safest place to ride out a tsunami is in the deep, open ocean, not trapped in the harbor. And deep inside the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, a reactor operator grips a control panel. His knuckles white. The entire building is shuddering violently. Alarms scream as needles on 100 gauges dance erratically. The plant's safety systems automatically scram the reactors, inserting control rods to halt the fission chain reaction. But the shaking doesn't stop. This is not just an earthquake. This is a megathrust earthquake, a rupture of unimaginable scale, hundreds of kilometers off the coast of Japan, along a massive fault line known as the Japan Trench. 2 tectonic plates that have been locked together for centuries have finally slipped. A section of the fault, 400 kilometers long and 200 kilometers wide, has just lurched. In some places, the seafloor has slipped by as much as 50 meters. That's over 160 feet thrust in the Pacific Plate under Japan. The sheer energy released is staggering, a magnitude 9.1. It is so powerful it physically shoves the main island of Honshu more than 2 meters to the east, and even slightly alters the Earth's axis. The early warning system, a network of over 1,000 gave people precious seconds, maybe 15 to 30 seconds of warning before the strongest shaking arrived. Enough time to get under a table, to stop a train, to brace for impact. But nothing could prepare them for the duration. The immense length of the fault rupture is why the shaking goes on and on. Wave after seismic wave rolling across the landscape for 6 terrifying minutes. And then, as the last of the violent tremors subside, a new sound begins. The earthquake alarms on televisions and radios are replaced by a new, more urgent warning. The automated voices echoing from coastal loudspeakers change their message. Tsunami. Tsunami. Evacuate to high ground immediately. The message becomes more chilling. The tsunami is expected to be higher than the seawalls along the vast Sendai Plain. The ocean does something that defies all logic. It begins to pull back, not just the tide going out, but the entire sea receding from the shore, withdrawing for hundreds of meters, then a kilometer or more. It exposes a dark, muddy seafloor that hasn't seen the sun in generations, leaving fish flapping helplessly on the wet sand. The water is drawn back, as if the ocean itself is taking a deep, ominous breath. The sea is coming back, higher and faster than memory. The first waves are striking. 4 millions along Japan's northeast coast. The initial violent shaking of the earth was just the beginning. Now, the real test begins. On the flat, low-lying Sendai Plain, life is a checkerboard of runways, rice fields, and small communities. But in an instant, that changes. The sea doesn't just rise. It attacks. A black wall of water, churning with unimaginable force, erases the coastline and begins its relentless surge inland. What was once farmland becomes a dark, debris-filled river, moving faster than anyone can run. At Sendai Airport, the ground crew chief watches in disbelief as the sea consumes the tarmac. There's no time to think, only to act. He yells, urging his colleagues upward, climbing, scrambling for the highest point they can find, the terminal roof as. The airport below is swallowed whole. Further up the coast, in the town of Minamisanriku, a firefighter shoves people, anyone he can reach, urging them, higher. Go, higher. He doesn't look back. He just pushes them towards the safety of the hills behind the town. Meanwhile, from the town's disaster response center, a voice continues to broadcast warnings over the loudspeakers. The voice is steady, professional, and calm. Even as the water begins to climb the outside of the building, floor by floor, their final words are a plea for everyone to evacuate. In the port towns of Ofunato and Kesennuma, the geography becomes an enemy. The narrow V-shaped bays act like funnels, amplifying the tsunami's power, concentrating its fury. Massive fishing vessels snap their thick mooring lines like thread. The water, now a terrifying slurry of cars, lumber, and entire houses, smashes everything in its path. Oil tanks at the port rupture, and the black water ignites, creating a horrifying, fire-whipped inferno on the waves. But in Kamaishi, something different happens. Here, the lessons have been learned. For years, students have practiced a principle known as tsunami tendenko. Evacuate for yourself. Don't wait for others. Just go. As the waves crash over the town's formidable seawalls, the children don't hesitate. They run. And when they reach their designated evacuation point and see the water still rising, they don't stop. They remember the second rule. Always seek higher ground. They keep climbing, saving themselves and, in doing so, inspiring the adults around them to follow. The physics are brutal and simple. This isn't a single wave, but a series of them, with later ones often proving larger and more destructive than the first. The surge moves like a solid wall, a liquid bulldozer that no one can outrun. It's a deadly churn, a demolition zone on the move. The chaos isn't just on the coast. Inland, the entire infrastructure of a modern nation is groaning under the strain. Bullet trains freeze on their tracks. Highways fracture and split. In Tokyo, hundreds of kilometers away, the world's tallest towers sway like reeds in the wind. A dizzy, terrifying motion that sends millions of office workers spilling out onto the streets. With all public transport shut down, they begin the long, silent walk home. A mass exodus through a city suddenly rendered powerless. But the wave has another target, one hidden from sight along the coast of Fukushima. Here, massive concrete walls, designed to protect against the worst the ocean could deliver, are about to be breached. The surge overruns these defenses with terrifying ease. Water floods the basements of a critical facility, drowning the backup diesel generators that are the last line of defense. Inside a brightly lit control room, engineers stare at their panels in horror. Then, one by one, the warning lights begin to flicker. The alarms scream. And then, the room goes dark, as survivors across the north cling to rooftops in the freezing twilight. A far more insidious crisis is just beginning, hidden behind thick concrete walls. Darkness falls, not just over the land, but inside the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The station blackout is absolute. The relentless tsunami has swept away the diesel generators, and now, the backup batteries are dying, one by one. In the pitch-black control rooms, the world shrinks to the narrow beam of a flashlight. Gauges are unreadable. Systems are unresponsive. It's a descent into a pre-industrial nightmare. but with atomic stakes. Engineers, breathing through respirators in the stale air, scribble calculations on notes. They need to relieve the mounting pressure, but the valves, designed to be operated electronically, won't budge. They try to connect car batteries, anything to get a trickle of power, but it's not enough. The frantic search for manual cranks begins, a desperate hunt in a concrete labyrinth as they wrestle with the machinery. A terrifying debate unfolds. The only coolant available now is the very thing that caused this catastrophe. Seawater. It's a last resort, a move that will permanently destroy the reactors. But the alternative is unthinkable. As they argue, a silent, invisible threat is growing within the reactor buildings. Hydrogen, stripped from water molecules by the extreme heat of the exposed fuel rods, is accumulating, turning the containment structures into ticking time bombs. No one knows how much is there. No one can see it, but it's building. Outside the plant's walls, the scale of the human tragedy is becoming horrifyingly clear. Helicopter spotlights sweep across a new, dark ocean where towns once stood. The beams catch surreal scenes. Rooftops bobbing in the current, cars tangled in power lines, and occasionally, a flicker of movement. On the second floor of a submerged home, a family waves a white cloth, their figures silhouetted against the dark water. Rescue is a lottery. On the coast, search teams navigate through a slurry of mud and debris, calling out into the silence. The stories of impossible choices are everywhere. In one town, teachers at an elementary school stare at conflicting evacuation maps. One says to go to the community hall, now clearly underwater. Another points to higher ground, but the route is blocked by debris. With terrified children in their care, they have to make a life or death decision based on instinct and a terrifying lack of information. This isn't about blame. It's about the impossible weight placed on ordinary people in an extraordinary crisis. Along the shattered coastline, older residents point to ancient stone markers, half buried in the mud. For generations, these stones have carried a simple warning from their ancestors who survived past tsunamis. Do not build your homes below this point. A warning ignored for the convenience of modern life. But even in the deepest despair, there is astonishing courage. In the town of Kamaishi, a story that would later be called a miracle is unfolding. Middle school students, drilled in disaster preparedness, don't wait for instructions. They start running uphill, shouting for others to follow. When they see a group of panicked elementary school children, they take their hands, leading them, calming them, improvising new routes as landslides block their path. They keep climbing, pushing past the designated evacuation point, driven by an instinct that higher is safer. Their split-second decision saves thousands of lives, a testament to learned knowledge and sheer will. As the night deepens, a bitter cold seeps in. Snow begins to fall, a cruel, gentle blanket over the devastation. Shelter school gymnasiums, community centers are overflowing. The displaced huddle together, wrapped in shared blankets on cardboard floors. Walls are covered with pieces of paper, names of the missing scrawled in marker. A desperate, silent roll call for the lost. The rhythm of life is broken. Aftershocks continue to rattle already frayed nerves, each tremor sending a fresh wave of fear through the shelters. Fuel is running out, creating massive lines at the few functioning gas stations. On the horizon, the sky over Chiba glows orange as oil refineries burn, another scar on the wounded landscape. Back at Fukushima Daiichi, the pressure is reaching a critical point. The engineers have a plan, a desperate, dangerous one. They must vent radioactive steam directly into the atmosphere to prevent the containment vessels from exploding. It's a choice between a localized disaster and a potentially catastrophic one. But how do you vent a system with no power? As dawn breaks, it brings light, but no relief. The sky is gray, heavy with snow and unspoken fear. Evacuation zones are being hastily expanded, pushing people further from their homes, further into uncertainty. The sun rises on a new day, but it also illuminates the beginning of a new kind of threat, one that no siren can warn against, no wall can stop. An invisible contamination is poised to spread, and the race against a full-scale atomic cascade has just begun. The clock was ticking, not just in one place, but everywhere. At the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, A desperate battle had begun. Engineers fought to vent superheated steam from the reactor cores, a necessary risk to relieve catastrophic pressure. The sound was deafening, a roar of a contained giant trying to break free. Then, silence, followed by a blunt, concussive shock that reverberated for miles. On March 12th, a hydrogen explosion tore the outer building of Reactor Unit 1 to shreds. 2 days later, Unit 3 suffered the same fate. The buildings for Units 2 and 4 were also damaged. Radiation alarms shrieked, a constant, piercing cry. Amid the chaos, a core team made a choice that would define the crises. They would stay. These were the men who would become known as the Fukushima 50, ordinary plant workers, technicians, and engineers who chose to face unimaginable danger to manually inject seawater into the overheating cores, a last-ditch effort to prevent a full meltdown. While they fought their invisible war, the visible one was raging along the ravaged coastline. The largest mobilization in Japan's post-war history was underway. 100,000 Self-Defense Forces personnel swarmed into the disaster zone. Their mission was monumental. Find the living. Firefighters and Coast Guard teams in boats and helicopters navigated a surreal landscape of floating houses and submerged cars, pulling survivors from rooftops. A massive airlift operation began, ferrying the injured from isolated hospitals to safety. International help started to arrive. The American military's Operation Tamadachi saw aircraft carriers stationed offshore, their helicopters becoming a lifeline for remote communities. Antigran engineers worked relentlessly to clear what they called the Road of Life, a single passable route carved through the debris-choked highways, allowing aid to finally reach the cut-off coastal towns. The science behind the devastation was both simple and brutal. Seawalls, built to withstand the worst imaginable tsunamis, were simply overtopped. The waves that day exceeded their design height by meters. The unique geography of the Sanriku coast, wheat eats deep narrow inlets, known as rias, acted as a funnel, amplifying the height and destructive power of the tsunami as it surged inland. At Fukushima, the total station blackout, the complete loss of all power, was the critical failure. Without electricity, the cooling systems stopped. Without cooling, the nuclear fuel rods began to overheat, boiling the surrounding water, producing steam, and ultimately splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, an explosive combination waiting for a spark. But beyond the scale and the science were the individual moments of humanity. At Sendai Airport, completely submerged by the tsunami, the airport chief stood on a flooded upper floor, using a handheld radio to guide helicopter airdrops of supplies onto the waterlogged apron below. In a makeshift shelter, a firefighter, his face etched with exhaustion, meticulously wrote the names of the missing on a whiteboard, each stroke a prayer for a life. After 2 terrifying nights spent on a cold, exposed hillside, a grandmother was finally reunited with her grandchild, a moment of profound relief in a sea of loss. At the Fukushima plant, an operator found a working lamp. He had 10 seconds to call his family, to tell them he was alive, to tell them he loved them. Then, he hung up and went back to the valves, back to the fight. As days turned into nights, the rhythm of the response began to shift. The frantic search for survivors at dusk was punctuated by the unnerving tick of Geiger counters and the quiet fall of snow on a landscape of twisted metal and shattered homes. In the controlled rooms at Fukushima, the news was cautiously optimistic. Reactor temperatures were finally bending downward. A fragile victory, but the situation remained precarious. The danger had not passed. Across the northeast, the desperate hope of rescue was slowly, painfully, giving way to the grim reality of recovery. Towns were beginning the horrific task of counting their dead. The true scale of the loss was just starting to be understood, a wound carved deep into the nation's soul. As Japan stood on this precipice, facing the aftermath, a new, daunting question began to form. How does a nation bear what cannot be undone, and what must now be changed to ensure it never happens again? The most difficult images are often the most necessary. Row after row of photographs, laid out in gymnasiums that had become temporary families bowing over simple urns. A final, quiet goodbye. Makeshift memorials appearing on seawalls and school grounds, a testament to lives cut short. A nation pausing for a minute of silence, A profound quiet, broken only by the sound of the surf, the very same sound that had heralded the disaster. Each story we've followed finds its own difficult resolution. That student from Kamaishi returns to the hilltop that became their refuge, looking down at a town forever changed. The firefighter in Minamisanriku stands on an empty foundation, the spot where the Disaster Prevention Center once stood, a ghost of a building filled with ghosts of colleagues. At Sendai Airport, the chief watches the first plane land on a reopened runway, a small but powerful victory over the chaos. And at Fukushima, a plant operator steps into the decontamination chamber, knowing this is just the first day of a grueling, months-long fight to stabilize the reactors. The numbers are staggering and hard to comprehend. Nearly 20,000 people lost or still missing. Hundreds of thousands forced from their homes. Entire towns wiped off the map. An exclusion zone around Fukushima. A silent, empty landscape where seasons pass without people. But beyond the statistics, there is the lived reality of the aftermath. Japan began to rebuild, not just its structures, but its very relationship with the sea. New seawalls, towering and immense, now line much of the coast. Roads were raised, entire neighborhoods relocated to higher ground, vertical evacuation towers now. The landscape, offering a quick escape route. School children across the nation are now taught tsunami tendenko. Flee for your life. Don't wait for others. The hard-learned lessons of the Indian Ocean in 2004 found their tragic echo in the Pacific and were finally heeded. The country's energy policy was turned upside down. Reactors were idled, and a new push for renewable energy began. Resilience is a powerful word, but it's not a simple one. It looks like blue tops slowly being replaced by new, sturdy roofs. It looks like a single pine tree, painstakingly planted where an entire forest was swept away. A symbol of hope. It looks like dosimeters quietly clicking in schoolyards, a constant reminder of an invisible threat. It's in the fishermen who now meticulously test every catch, rebuilding trust one fish at a time. It's the long, quiet, and often lonely work of processing trauma and piecing a community back together. It's a story that doesn't truly end. It continues in the rebuilt home that still faces the same vast, beautiful, and dangerous sea. It's there, in the sign, pointing the way to higher ground. A silent guide for future generations. It's in the sound of a bell, tested and ready. A promise that next time, the warning will come, and it will be heard. The echoes of that day in 2011 continue to shape Japan, a profound story of loss, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. Thank you for joining us on this journey. For more true stories that have shaped our world, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you watching.